The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. Propaganda, a systematic effort to shape perceptions, manipulate cognitions, and direct behavior to achieve a response that furthers the interests and desired intent of the propagandists. Propaganda has been a potent tool wielded by rulers and governments alike throughout human history. This essay examines the neurological and psychological mechanics of propaganda, its historical applications, and the way its evolution shaped modern governance and society. Propaganda is a seminal work written by Edward Bernays, Freud's nephew, first published in 1928. Bernays, often referred to as the father of public relations, presents a comprehensive analysis of propaganda as a tool for influencing public opinion and shaping societal behavior. The book's contents can be summarized as follows. Bernays defines propaganda broadly as the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses. The book discusses the emergence of propaganda techniques during World War I and their subsequent applications in peacetime. Bernays emphasizes how the war demonstrated the power of organized persuasion. Bernays outlines various techniques for influencing public opinion, including use of symbols and slogans, manipulation of news, creation of events to generate publicity, utilization of group leaders and opinion makers. The book delves into the psychological underpinnings of mass behavior, discussing concepts like group mentality, stereotype, and the role of the unconscious in decision-making. We will touch upon a few of these on this video. Bernays explores how business can use propaganda techniques to influence consumer behavior and create demand for products. The book also examines how propaganda can be used in politics to shape public perception of candidates and policies. Bernays presents propaganda as a tool for social engineering, arguing that it can be used to mold the public's desires and beliefs in ways that benefit society. While largely advocating for the use of propaganda, Bernays does touch on the ethical responsibilities of those who wield these techniques. The book includes various examples and case studies demonstrating the practical application of propaganda techniques in different fields. Propaganda is notable for its frank discussion of manipulation techniques and has been both influential and controversial, shaping the field of public relationship and marketing while also raising ethical concerns about the nature of mass persuasion in modern society. Last but not least, on the book we have a little bit of a discussion about the possible future outlook, in the sense that Bernays tries to speculate about the future role of propaganda in a future society, ending up predicting its incremental importance in an increasingly complex world. Propaganda has existed as long as organized rule has. We have seen it in the Roman era, both in Republican times and Imperial times, in World War II, but it is in the age of information that propaganda has reached a new peak, facilitated by social media, advanced language models, and algorithms that study your every choice and word. In other words, public opinion has become a resource harvested to produce power. Agents of propaganda also tend to have telltales. There are some key elements and psychological patterns that we can recognize when it comes to an agent of any sort of propaganda or mental manipulation. For example, ask someone like that a question. You'll notice that they will either give you an answer that is completely unrelated, or they might answer your question with another question. This is done to show dominance in the debate, but also to remind you at a subconscious level who's in charge of the information shared. At its core, propaganda operates by exploiting cognitive biases and emotional triggers. Some key techniques include the following. Simplification. Complex issues are reduced to a simple slogan or binary choices. Repetition. Messages are consistently repeated to increase retention and acceptance. Appeal to emotion. Fear, anger, pride, and other strong emotions are evoked to override rational thought. Bandwagon effect. The illusion of widespread support is created to encourage conformity. ad hominem attacks. Opponents are discredited through personal attacks rather than addressing their arguments. Cherry-picking, selective use of facts to support a particular narrative while ignoring contradictory evidence. False dilemmas, presenting only two options, typically one extreme and one favorable to the propagandist. Propaganda has its roots in ancient civilizations. Notable examples include ancient Egypt. Pharaohs used monumental architecture and religious iconography to project divine power. Roman Empire. Emperors like Gaius Julius Caesar, Octavianus Augustus employed coins, statues, and literature to cultivate a cult of personality. Moreover, the famous damnatio memoriae was another aspect of propaganda at work. Medieval Europe. Monarchs utilized religious symbolism and pageantry to reinforce their divine right to rule. Imperial China. Emperors employed Confucian scholars to craft historical narratives legitimizing their reign. And of course there are many more that I won't be able to dive into nor mention, such as for example Mesoamerican civilizations, but just to keep it concise. However, I'd like to now focus on more modern applications. The 20th century saw propaganda evolve into a sophisticated tool of statecraft. During World War I, all major powers established dedicated propaganda offices. In Nazi Germany, Joseph Goebbels' Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda exemplified totalitarian control of information. In the Soviet Union, the Communist Party maintained strict control over media, education, and cultural production to shape public opinion. During the Cold War, both the United States and the USSR engaged in global propaganda campaigns, including several radio stations. Another interesting and pertinent historical example that I'd like to cover briefly is the way the American government justified the utilization of nuclear devices of mass destruction against the Japanese during World War II. Key narratives promoted included the necessity to end the war quickly and save American lives that would be lost in a land invasion of Japan, the portrayal of the bombs as a decisive new technology that demonstrated overwhelmingly US power, the depiction of Japanese leaders and citizens as fanatical and unwilling to surrender through conventional means, the downplaying of the bombs' devastating human toll and long-term effects, the framing of the attacks as a retaliation for Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor and other wartime actions. These messages were relentlessly disseminated through news reports, official statements, films, and other media. Moreover, the government famously controlled the spreading of information of any form of public depiction of the effects of the bombs, including graphic depictions of suffering and damage. Over time, this narrative became deeply ingrained in American public consciousness, though historians have since challenged many of its core claims. Another important aspect that I would like to discuss when covering the topic of propaganda is indeed the indoctrination of the youth. The historically omnipresent idea of shaping young minds through the means of propaganda in order to foster the propagation and success of any given ideology is indeed a key component of long-term application. While changing an already formed adult mind is not impossible and it's absolutely achievable, yet challenging, the idea of morphing a still developing mind is infinitely more easy in the lenses of comparative analysis. To give once again a historical example, the Nazi regime placed a strong emphasis on indoctrinating youth, recognizing that to target young people was the key to replace an uncertain older nation into a nation of supporters of their cause. This was done through the education system, with a complete overhaul of school curricula to align with Nazi ideology. History, biology, and even maths were infused with nationalistic content and promote party ideology. We also have the Hitler's Youth and League of German Girls, with a mandatory membership for children aged 10 to 18. Activities combined with political indoctrination with appealing elements like camping and sports. Emphasis was placed on physical fitness, military-style discipline, and loyalty to Hitler. Books and magazines promoted Nazi racial theories. Stories glorified Hitler and Nazi leaders as heroes. Traditional fairy tales were rewritten with Nazi themes. Creation of entertainment specifically targeting youth, newsreels and documentaries in school promoting Nazi worldview, radio programs like Hitler Youth Hour broadcast nationwide, widespread use of Nazi symbolism in children's everyday lives, for example on school materials, posters and artwork depicting idealized Aryan youths, youth participation in Nazi rallies and parades, ceremonies like the youth consecration replacing religious coming-of-age rituals, banning of youth organizations not aligned with Nazi ideology and also the encouragement to report support un-German behavior, even within families, was spread, framing Nazi goals as a noble mission for German youth to undertake and also emphasizing on concepts like sacrifice for the greater good of the nations were taught. The effectiveness of this youth-centered propaganda was historically significant. By the end of the 1930s, many young Germans were fervent supporters of the Nazi regime, having known little else throughout their formative years. This systematic indoctrination of youth remains one of the most studied aspects of Nazi propaganda, serving as a stark warning about the power of targeting young minds with political ideology of any kind. Modern propaganda has evolved in response to technological and social changes. Within the digital age, governments now employ social media, data analytics, and artificial intelligence to micro-target audiences and spread misinformation. We have state actors which engage in coordinated campaigns to influence foreign populations and elections. Governments create the illusion of grassroots movements to manipulate public opinion. Advanced AI enables the creation of highly convincing false audio and video content. Last but not least, we have the role of echo chambers. Social media algorithms reinforce existing beliefs, making populations more susceptible to propaganda. If you appreciate my content so far and wish to help ensure my ability to continue to tell it how it is, regardless of any possible backlash, please support this channel on Patreon. Any support helps me and my team of academics keep the channel strong and gives us the means to fight back against the political rewriting of history. Stand with us, form the wall, defend the truth. The effectiveness of propaganda lies in its ability to exploit human psychology, while at the same time adapting to new communication technologies. As propaganda techniques become more sophisticated, critical thinking and media literacy become increasingly crucial for maintaining free discourse and informed citizenry. The psychological underpinning of propaganda's influence on the masses are complex and multifaceted. This analysis will delve deeper into the cognitive and emotional mechanisms that make populations susceptible to propaganda techniques. Propagandists exploit several well-documented cognitive biases. Confirmation bias. People tend to seek out, interpret, and recall information that confirms their pre-existing beliefs. Propagandists leverage this by presenting information that aligns with the target's already preconceived ideas, making it more likely to be accepted without scrutiny. Individuals tend to overestimate the likelihood of events that are easily recalled. By repeatedly exposing people to certain ideas or images, propagandists can make these concepts seem more prevalent or important than they actually are. The next item that I would like to explore now is the so-called anchoring effect. The first piece of information encountered on a subject often serves as a reference point for subsequent judgments. Propaganda aims to set the narrative early to influence how later information is interpreted. It is also important to underline the fact that people's tendency to adopt beliefs or behaviors because many others do is also very much exploited through manufactured consensus and social proof. This is because a single individual thinks in a way, but an individual who is part of a mass or a group thinks differently. He thinks as the group. In other words, we could say that a multitude of individuals tend to share one single group mind. Manipulate the single group mind and you will have access and control over all single elements. Finally, we have the framing effect. How information is presented or framed influences decision making. People utilizing propaganda carefully craft their messages to evoke specific interpretations and responses. Let us now dive even deeper, discussing the world of emotional manipulation. Propaganda often targets emotions to override rational thought processes, as mentioned. By highlighting threats, real or imagined, propagandists can motivate compliance or support for certain policies. Tribalism. Exploiting in-group versus out-group dynamics fosters a sense of belonging and can dehumanize perceived enemies. Nostalgia. Appealing to an idolized past can generate support for aggressive policies or resistance to change. Pride and patriotism. National or cultural pride can be manipulated to garner support for leaders or policies, even when they may not serve the populace' best interests. Anger and indignation. Stoking outrage can mobilize populations and direct their energy towards specified targets, in the behest of the ruling elites, of those wielding the psychological power. Propaganda often has historically worked in order to shape personal and cultural identities. Creating or reinforcing national myths can shape a population's self-perception and values. Blaming societal problems on specific people can also unite the majority against a so-called common enemy. Hero worship. Cultivating cults of personalities around leaders can foster unquestioning loyalty. Last but not least, victimhood narratives. Portraying one's group as perpetually victimized can justify aggression or isolationism. This connects with the next section of this video, where we will delve into the concept of cognitive load and information processing. Propaganda techniques often exploit a limitation in human information processing. Information overload. Overwhelming audiences with information can lead to cognitive fatigue, making them more susceptible to simplistic explanations. Mere exposure effect. Repeated exposure to a stimulus may increase the chances of linking to it, even without conscious awareness. Primary and recency effect. People tend to remember the first and last items in a series best, which propagandists use in structuring their messages. Cognitive dissonance. When faced with conflicting information, people often change their beliefs to maintain consistency rather than critically evaluating new data. Social influence and conformity. Propaganda often leverages several psychological and social principles. The authority principle. People tend to obey authority figures, which propagandists exploit by associating messages with respected leaders or institutions. Social proof. Individuals look to others for cues on how to behave, making manufactured consensus a powerful tool. Commitment and consistency. Once people take a small action or express a belief, they tend to act in ways consistent with that commitment, which propagandists can use to escalate engagement. Reciprocity. The obligation to return a favor can be exploited through strategic gifts or concessions. Recent neuroscientific research has shed light in the way propaganda affects brain functions. Amygdala activation. Emotional content, particularly fear-inducing stimuli, can bypass higher cognitive processing. Dopamine release. Confirmation of existing beliefs can trigger reward pathways in the brain, reinforcing adherence to propagandistic narratives. Neuroplasticity. Repeated exposure to propaganda can potentially rewire neural pathways, making certain thought patterns more automatic. In summary, propaganda's ability to shape beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors is rooted in complex neurological processes that interact with cognitive biases and social-cultural factors. An interesting discovery pertaining to the neurological aspect of propaganda is the discussion that has to do not only with social dynamics, but also with something called the mirror neuron. The mirror neuron system, first discovered in monkeys and later identified in humans, may play a role in this process. These neurons, primarily located in the inferior frontal gyrus and inferior parietal lobe, activate both when an individual performs an action and when they observe others performing the same action. This system is thought to underpin empathy and social learning. In the context of propaganda, activation of mirror neurons during observation of in-group members' responses to propaganda may facilitate the adoption of similar attitudes and behaviors through a process of neural simulation. There is also a connection between cognitive load and the suppression of the prefrontal cortex. Many propaganda techniques aim to overwhelm cognitive resources, potentially suppressing activity in the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex, particularly the anterior cingulate cortex and dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, is crucial for executive functions including critical thinking and cognitive control. Under conditions of high cognitive load and stress, which propaganda often induces, prefrontal cortex activity can be diminished. This phenomenon, known as cognitive decoupling, can reduce analytical thinking and increase reliance on heuristic processing, making individuals more susceptible to simplistic propagandistic narratives. In conclusion of this section, the neurological impact of propaganda is a multifaceted phenomenon involving interactions between emotional processing, reward system, memory consolidation, social cognition, and executive function. Understanding these underlying mechanisms can inform strategies for enhancing cognitive resilience and developing more effective counter-propaganda measures. In conclusion, propaganda's effectiveness stems from its ability to exploit several vulnerabilities in our psychological framing, inherent in human cognition and emotion. By understanding these mechanisms, we can develop more effective strategies for critical thinking and resilience against manipulative messaging. However, the deeply ingrained nature of many of these psychological processes makes combating propaganda an ongoing challenge for societies worldwide. And as always, if you found this content informative and educational, please consider giving us a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel for more content from the Metatron, and remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye.